Okay, folks, it is time to eat your vegetables. We are talking about the role of the United States and broader geopolitical strategy. And I know some of you really, really hate these types of videos, but I really do think it is important. We talk a lot about tactics. We talk a lot about the conduct of war and how we actually go about this. But the reality of armed conflict is that it only makes sense in the context in which we're talking about. And if we're not talking about how Western forces are applied to the broader world, then what are we doing, right? So to be clear, this is my opinions. I used to be in the Army. I am no longer in the Army, and my opinions are my own, I'm not employed by the U.S. government in any capacity. So take it for what you will, and I hope that we can have a reasonable conversation down in the comments, but I'm sure it probably won't be. But the reason I want to talk about this is, especially with the U.S. election in full swing, there's a lot of opinions flying out. And I tend to hear two opinions on both the left and the right that seem to coincide. And I'll offer my rebuttal, but usually what I hear is that from my more left-leaning friends, the opinion is that the United States is acting as an empire and we should close all of our military bases because we are acting in an immoral capacity, and we should just get out of everyone's hair, stop instigating conflict, and we should not be the world police because we are just causing more harm than good, right? And my more conservative friends also say that, we should close all of our military bases, bring all the troops home, and stop being the world police because we're tired of subsidizing the defense of Europe and Asia and everywhere else because we spend so much money on other nations' defense rather than focusing on our own. And there's certainly merit to both of those arguments. Intelligent people can have disagreements on those opinions. But allow me to offer my rebuttal, if you will, and just my pitch for why the United States should behave as the world police and not become more of an isolationist power as we go farther into the 21st century. And really what I think those arguments from the left and the right both tend to not fully understand is that the nature and the natural state of most of the world is war, right? Europe, it was constantly at war for centuries, for millennia before World War I and World War II. Same thing for Asia. The reason there's so much bad blood between, Korea, China, and Japan was because of just the centuries of regional war, chaos, and infighting. And to my more left-leaning friends, I would point out that those dynamics still exist. China cannot feed its people without foreign involvement. If China is not able to if China's in conflict and can't trade with Australia, they're going to have to conquer their region and create a regional empire in order to secure those resources for their people. Europe, we like to think of Europe as being a relatively peaceful place with free healthcare, but Europe does not have the ability to power its electric grid without oil from the Middle East or oil from Asia. If they are not able to trade with those places due to either regional conflict or more direct conflict, they are going to have to become a colonial power again and fight to secure those resources, and probably end up fighting each other again in a more regional conflict in order to secure the resources for their nation. So the natural state for most of the world is to become these regional empires with power centers that then colonize and oppress other areas, typically like Africa, the Middle East, that aren't able to field large enough armies. So you end up getting a more brutal colonial system if the United States does not play peacekeeper and does not enable the free trade around the world. So I would argue to my more left-leaning friends that it's much worse with that if the United States decides to back off. That's not to say we can't criticize American foreign policy. That's not to say don't write your congressman and everything, because we certainly always want to be improving. But I would argue that it gets a lot worse if the United States takes a step back. You get regional powers creating regional empires, and that's not fun for anybody. But my more conservative friends who would say, well, okay, cool, those wars are nasty, but that's not our business. We don't care. We don't want to get involved in this stuff. So let them go to war. Let them fight and conquer us. The United States is independent in oil. We're independent in food. We can do whatever we want. And if we have interests, we can secure those interests as we need. And I understand that sentiment. That is certainly true. We certainly do subsidize the defense of much of the world. But I would point out that historically speaking, we've done this before. We did that. That was kind of the whole thing of the 20th century, was where we tried to be independent for World War I, World War II. And then you get Pearl Harbor, you get the Zimmerman telegram, you get the Lusitania, where something happens where the wars in Europe, the wars in Asia, something happens, someone gets pissed off the United States for either being too neutral or maybe they were still trading with your enemy or whatever, and suddenly you get sucker punched. Suddenly something happens that generates so much outrage that the people demand to get involved, and then suddenly the United States is island hopping through the Pacific. Suddenly we're landing on Normandy, and we're not doing like little peacekeeping missions in Kosovo. Instead, we're having to defeat these regional empires that have spent decades aggregating power in these areas. So my pitch is that even though it is frustrating to subsidize the defense of nations, we're getting a lot of return on just keeping the peace, enabling conflicts to be resolved. If things step out of line, like Iraq invading Kuwait for Desert Storm, like those things, even though it's not fun to get involved in these little regional conflicts, doing these little conflicts over time is much, much better than waiting for these conflicts to be massive and waiting for the conflicts to be massive and then having to fight these massive regional powers in these global threatening wars. That is a terrible situation. Nobody wants another World War II, right? Nobody wants a World War III. And the way we prevent World War III is by taking care of all these regional conflicts. And I know that it is frustrating when Europe doesn't seem to be able to muster together a tank brigade to save their life, but I would point out that that's kind of the point. If France, if Germany, if Britain, if Poland all were able to field massive armies, that's not a great thing for local stability. Like, it's kind of the point that we subsidize a lot of the international defense forces so that they don't have to have these massive armies, and they are not as able to suddenly create these regional empires. So that's my pitch. I'm sure that other people will disagree, and we can talk about it in the comments. Please be polite and respectful to each other, because people get upset with this stuff. But that is my pitch, and that is where I'm coming at. Let me know what you think, and yeah, thanks very much.